great panel here. We've got Stephen Spellicy from VMware, Neil McRae from BT, and Kim Larsen from T-Mobile Netherlands, and they're going to be running through some of the questions on this topic. But before we do that, I wanted to invite you, the audience, to take part in a poll. And I'm going to now attempt to share this poll with you. And essentially, the poll is asking the following question. You should see this up on your screens. And it's saying, for an operator that you know, either one that you're working on or one that you know very well, what would you identify as the main driver for automation, and particularly the automation in network and service operations? And the three options we've set out here, and you can only answer one, but three options we set out are, is it for you primarily about reducing the operating cost of the existing network and services? Is it more about reducing your time to market or increasing innovation in the business? Or is it actually the only way that you can see to grow and scale effectively, given the limited skills and resources you've got available? So we're inviting you to just pick one of those. I see we're getting quite a few responses, but do keep going. Only about a fifth of you have voted so far. So I'm encouraging all of you in the audience here to click on one of those three options. Give you another 5 seconds. So we're going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to saw some people just mopping up here. I'll give you the last couple of seconds. There is a way of showing this somehow, but just in case, I'm just going to write down the numbers, 44 and 18, and I'm going to close the poll off, and I'm going to share it back with you. So I think those of you who are joining us can see that about the same number, 41% voted the first option, reducing operating costs, existing network services. The same number voted to reduce the time to market, and about 17% of respondents, so a smaller group, felt that this was the only way to scale shorter. So equally balanced, and that's actually 70% of you voted. So there's a lot of people voting, and that's how it came out. So interesting results. What I'm going to do now is close that result and return to the session. So let me just first of all kick off and just ask our panelists to introduce them all, and ask our panelist, Stephen, from your perspective, is that what you'd have expected? Is that what you've seen with the operators you've been working in terms of their priorities?
I feel that those responses are pretty spot on. Our operators that we work with are balancing the race to 5G, so they're looking for time to market opportunity and really to accelerate. And then they're using automation to keep the cost down because of the obvious expense associated with building a new network and launching it in new markets. So those two are they're what I expected. Okay, and potentially the third one is a little bit more, I don't know, greenfield or more stretched operators who may be starting out and they're looking out. So there may be a smaller group of operators for whom that's the key priority. And Kim, can I ask you, from your experience, I'll ask you first of all, which one did you choose or would you choose for T-Mobile?
Well, I mean, if I really had to make a choice, so that's a good one, right? Because I think indeed also, as Stephen indicated, it's a kind of combination between probably all three. Not maybe so much about reducing existing costs, but also actually avoid future costs also, as Stephen alluded to. And I think also at least if you're a small operator and have a headcount restriction, I mean, first of all, it's difficult to get these kind of skills out in the wild, right? They tend to cluster around bigger companies, and if you really don't get them, then the only way to manage the complexity as you go forward is really to try to implement some of these new innovative technologies. But I think avoiding cost, saving costs, increase efficiency, but also actually being able to have the right time to market is obviously all important.
Great. And Neil, out of interest, did you have a preference between the three?
Yeah, I would have been one of those people that would have tried to hack the platform so I could vote for all three. Yeah. I think, I think it's hard to make a case on each of these things individually in my experience, and ideally trying to get benefits out of all three is usually where I would look to on something like that. I mean, And I think that the skills issue just isn't for. In fact, I think it's for any operator. Any operator out there that's trying to run a modern network with the kind of complexity in the modern network and the demands that customers put on quality of service, humans can't do that anymore. And we have life or death services running the network. We run the emergency services network on a network here in the UK, and you just can't have humans involved in that because we get it wrong sometimes. And I think that's one of our, I think as we progress through this call today, we'll find that we really are at the human limit of being able to run these networks in the way that we once did, 5, maybe even 3 years ago. I remember 10 years ago running a network and the whole thing was in my head. I knew every bit about it in my head. Today, it just isn't possible. So I would have clicked for all 3 of them, but probably with a bias towards new services and new capabilities.
Okay, great. And there was a fourth option that we took that off, which was in fact, this thing about humans can't, you have to automate. This idea of like the jet fighter that can't be flown because it's designed to be unstable, and that's not what networks are designed to do, but they are so complex that it's impossible to expect a human to intervene effectively. But that's a slightly different angle. But anyway, that's a good start, and they are deliberately difficult to choose between. In fact, the audience were down the middle on the first 2. So coming back to the main panel, and I guess along the lines of having to trade off, the challenge of investing in automation. So Stephen, can I ask you, in terms of, is there a clear case for you between the short-term gains and the longer-term operational efficiencies, or is that a false dichotomy?
Well, I think automation has been essential to the survival of the operators we work with and a variety of their evolutions across history. I mean, moved from 3G to 4G and then 4G to 5G as they plan their next generation networks. I also believe it doesn't have to be a trade-off. I think there are, and I've seen this from the operators we work with and what they deploy with our technology and others, is that there are opportunities to introduce AI and automation to solve traditional problems, those problems which you can get your hands around and arms around. And then there's those problems, as like Neil said, where you've got too many devices, the networks are too complex, and the sheer nature of 5G is just, n-dimensional by size and capacity. But those where you can introduce AI and automation to make short-term gains, I think it's a benefit to the organization. I mean, I think about customer experience for one of them, and one simple, very short-term gain that I see our operators implementing is just chat bots to automate, care interactions. Right? I mean, they're kind of annoying in some ways, but at the same time, for simple, mundane type problems, they can be very effective. So. But then in the more complex side of it, and sort of on the longer term, if you want your networks to operate in a truly self-healing, self-managing way as they increase in size and complexity, you need to think through AI and automation in the design, I believe, and where you're going to implement these technologies and the kinds of data sources you need to collect, the kind of information, the intervals in which you collect the information, and then how you'll process and validate the accuracy of that information to make the decisioning happen in those networks. So it's a very complex situation. It requires lots of planning and forethought, and then it requires continuous validation and maintenance. So it's not easy, but some of those smaller, lower-hanging fruit, if you will, the sort of lower-hanging fruit of automation, I think, are attainable today. And then in an evolutionary way, as new networks are being designed and deployed, new services are being designed, I think it's incumbent upon vendors and operators to work together to find solutions that can make the job easier.
Okay, and so coming on to you, Neil, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, where does AI in particular, in your view, fit in? So we talked about automation AI, slightly different things, I guess. AI is providing some of the closed loop decisioning around automation, but you can automate without AI. We have done for literally hundreds of years. I guess the first electromechanical switch is essentially a form of automation. So where do you see the role of AI in particular in delivering those sort of cost efficiencies and enhanced experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us at BT, and actually just by the by, because not many people know this, we have the most patents in AI in the UK, more than any other company, and we punch quite high on AI patents across the world, and that's because we truly believe this technology can make a significant difference, not just in what we do in networks, but across the board. So where we've been looking at AI is back to my earlier point, which is how can I use this technology to help reduce customer dissatisfaction? And that's everything from chatbots, which is relatively straightforward these days, although they continue to evolve. But more importantly, recently, a few years ago, we held this small event called the Olympics back here in 2012. It feels like a lifetime away compared to where we are now. But you've got an event. Usain Bolt has a 100-meter sprint. It lasts 10 seconds. If you have a network problem in that 10-second period, you've missed it. There's no way you're going to identify it, fix it, and restore it in the space of that 10 seconds. In fact, you're probably not even going to know if anyone actually saw the event until sometime afterwards, until someone tweets on Twitter that it's not working. So we started looking at AI back then, back in 2011, not just AI, but what actually has to be true for AI to help us, or more appropriate, probably machine learning we were looking at there. And I think the maturity of this was, okay, we've got some really great experts, let's use them to train the AI, but also let's use the AI in a kind of an early phase, which is tell us where the problem is, because even just finding the most simplest problem can take you an hour. A national network like ours, it's thousands of devices in different locations, many routing protocols, QoS, MPLS, segment routing. Where is the problem? And that can take you an hour. Usually when you find the problem, you fix it pretty quickly. So our initial venture into AI was to help us point, it's almost like it's here. And that was hugely valuable. And then actually we started to do things like, okay, what would you have done AI to fix this? And just compare what we did to fix it and what the AI would have suggested to fix it. But I see a time not far away where there's no human involvement in that. And in some parts of our internal network, we have that today where if you've got a flapping interface, we'll reset it automatically and the AI will handle that. And I think like with everything, this technology is about building trust in it, about understanding it, about learning it, and taking away the unknown. So that's, there isn't a part of our network where we're not considering AI as an option to help us run it better, frankly.
Okay, and an interesting picture you paint there of, first of all, getting the insights and the root cause analysis and getting to the heart of the problem, and then gradually it edges towards being closer. Then eventually the team have to let go and step back.
And Phil, AI, in some respects, many people think that's a new thing. It's been around for longer than we all might realize. But what was missing, it's not just about the AI, but it's also having the network platform designed in a way that the AI is useful. If you're using SNMP, and you're pulling the network every 15 minutes, having an AI that runs in milliseconds isn't going to help you. So, we started way back at the front, which is actually, if we had this instant fix capability, what would need to be true so that we could automate it and so that we could actually make a difference in the performance that we've got today? And that's where we helped invent telemetry and streaming telemetry, how we drove things like Yang and NetConf to be able to do much more granular type configuration changes and really modernize the world from what I call the Apollo era, where you have all these knocks and screens, into effectively the Whopper era, where it's this big computer that's running everything, and there's the odd light that blinks to show you that it's alive, but actually everything's under control.
Yep. No, and it's getting more like that. And it's going to come on to the next question. So Kim, if I can, thank you for that, Neil. I'm going to ask you a question about legacy in a moment, but before I do that, I want to come back to sort of 5G, and this is supposed to be looking at 5G. Right. And I want to ask you, I've seen these charts where the number of the sheer complexity, the sheer number of parameters involved in 5G are off the scale compared to 2, 3, 4G, 2, 3, and 4G. Then it sort of disappears off the scale. And we're talking about introducing with things like Open RAN, X apps and R apps, which are going to draw on external data points. So this whole thing is becoming hugely complex. And how do you balance this need for efficiency and performance with the rising complexity in these 5G networks that are emerging?
Well, I think there are many ways of capturing that, right? But I mean, I think often we are very good at communicating the complexity to everyone because we sort of hope that we will get a bit more budget to solve this. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, yes, it is getting more complex, particularly with heterogeneous networks. But when you then need to think about introducing machine learning or anomaly detection, which I think Neil was in fact actually talking about in certain sense, is actually trying to handle this complexity in a way where it becomes actually tractable. I don't necessarily subscribe to that the complexity increases massively. Yes, there are more parameters, but typically if you look at the most important parameters that you really need to have a handle on, actually that already reduces this sort of, let's just drown in a massive scale of parameters. So I think the most important thing from an architectural design perspective is to take all that complexity and try to make it a little bit more simple. And yes, if you look at self-optimized networks, you could literally optimize based on thousands of parameters. But let's get real here. It's not thousands of parameters that actually really matters. It's typically a handful of parameters. And that's, of course, where the machine learning anomaly detection can really play a mission. First of all, identifying the most important parameters for the customer experience, but also actually how do you actually close the loop on a run, on the edge, or actually go higher up into the stack, right? But I think what I often sense is you have either, there are people who believe in centralized control and decentralized control, where if you're a real telco engineer of a classical schooling, you like to have this top level control on everything, drosseling down your telco stack. And if you're probably more a software engineer into microservices, you're much more, hey, give each individual layer its own mission in terms of your machine learning implementation, right? But I think in general, it's not like you try to pay off the complexity by what you gain in efficiency. I think what we want to get to is that we have a problem managing this in general, not only 5G, but also 4G, and you need to get some automation in there that helps you in increasing and boosting customer experience, and indeed also capturing the incident before the customer might even get aware that there is an incident or becoming a critical incident, right? So I mean, there's no easy answers here, but I think drowning in complexity is very easy, but I think that's the wrong way to go about it.
Okay, no, that's a fair point. It's keeping the focus on the metrics that really matter and that actually drive experience and figuring out what they are and closing the loop on those and empowering that. So can I just sort of follow up, come back to you, Stephen, on that question of efficiency versus complexity of 5G networks. What are you seeing with operators sort of deploying 5G networks, particularly the sort of the cloud native 5G networks in the standalone core and the emerging, still early days, I know, but the emerging RAN implementations?
Most of our customers are excited about the use of containers and container orchestration, both to handle additional scaling needs, but also to handle, incident management, right, where they need to repair or heal networks if there's a problem, and they're using automation to facilitate the reinstantiation or creation of containers, to accommodate whatever the scenario is. The AI aspect of it is really useful, as Neil had mentioned, around the detection, and as Kim mentioned, those anomalies that may exist, which are indicative of problems that could result in a service outage or a quality issue from a service perspective. So if they're kind of hand in hand, and I think when you apply them to the nature of what 5G is, and all our customers, and in the enterprise too, not just our CSP customers, but the enterprise customers are excited about what 5G will bring. The nature of delivering services for specific applications with guaranteed service levels. They need to be monitored, they need to be managed, they need to be scaled up when new demand occurs. And so the hope is that the platforms they use and the tools inside the platform that they leverage will accommodate those scenarios and those use cases. And that's what we've been doing from our Telco Cloud platform perspective and our Telco Cloud automation, is building in those capabilities. So as you want to build and design the first network and then replicate, if you will, and then manage it through its life cycle, that's all possible from our perspective. I think when we get towards the edge, maybe the provider edge and then the enterprise edge, you're going to see more demand for this kind of real-time deployment and management, monitoring, as well as healing on the edge when things don't go so well. So I think they're really important aspects that need to be thought through, and many of our operators are already thinking through those and really deploying technology to address it.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And Neil, can I come back to you and with the same question again, and get your thoughts on, this balance of complexity, particularly related to 5G, and how do you see yourself organizing for efficiency at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's no question the network is getting more and more complex, and the demands at the same time on the network are becoming more life critical. There's just no question about that. We have a, COVID, if nothing else, has shown how important the network is. We're all sitting at home, okay, this isn't the most important thing in the world, but communications and being close to people is, and that's the simplest of services that we offer. We've been piloting on our 5G network here in the UK, being able to tilt and pan our radios to follow ambulances from the site of an RTA to a hospital. So that, and these are specially equipped ambulances that can do scans inside the ambulance, so that by the time the patient arrives, the doctor's already seen a whole load of history, where it's potentially a broken bone or some other medical condition. They know about it, and there's absolute value in the milliseconds that gives, in that scenario, heart attacks, being able to do an ECG on the way and push that data up. That is a service that you just can't do manually. I mean, there's just no way that you can make the radios tilt and understand the signal to noise and the bounce that you might be getting off another building. Also telling the ambulance, actually, maybe go down this street because we've got better coverage, and relaying that immediately to the ambulance driver. Anyone thinks you can do that automatically, you probably ran a minicab service back in the 80s or something. So in my mind, we have to be bold in this direction, being able to, for me, my high about, and why I love working in networking is seeing the network really make a difference in people's lives. And actually, the thing that holds that back is the human element of it. So I really want to push this technology as far as we can. And listen, I'm sure we'll make mistakes, and hopefully we'll realize that quickly and fix it and move on. But I think there are so many other services that the network can help improve life for the wider planet, but it will only be in that world where the network is truly autonomous and can truly think for itself to some extent. A bit, perhaps some of our audience are thinking a bit Terminator-like, but we as humans are, we're a slow, cumbersome creature, and we need to recognize that, and the evidence tells us, at Christmas and New Year, where everyone's on holiday, the network's the most reliable because we're not touching it, right? That's another sense. And then I look at the services. If we want to run automated factories, we want to do much more on transportation and optimizing transportation. Automation's just crucial. And we have another live pilot actually in Ipswich near BT Labs at Ashwell Park, where we're actually plotting the routes for parents to take to get their kids to and from schools. Now, you might think that's the most simplest, task, but actually congestion in that part of time, used to be really bad, used to be terrible. We're also applying it to buses and shared transportation, so that we can take transport off the road, or we can make people get to A and B and as quick and as short a distance as possible. Again, we're pulling that information down from the network. We're analyzing the real-time situation. How many people are there? How busy it is? What are they doing? Is there an RTA there? Or is there a weather insight that's giving us a view? We're putting all that together in our kind of AI data lake, and then making some real calls on it. And you know, I have to say I was a bit skeptical about that when we first started looking at it, but the feedback is hugely positive. And this is for me a true 5G service. And you know, it's the tip of an iceberg and relatively an easy use case that we can then start to apply to other things. But again, without AI, it's just not feasible. You know, it's just not feasibly possible to do it. I then look at, you know, some of the more mundane things around, you know, one of the big challenges we face is the use of energy in the network, you know, and we're very proud. We're 100% renewable. We've been taking out energy usage year after year after year. But, you know, 5G and massive MIMO are big power utilizations. But, you know, middle of the night, no one's there. If we know no one's there, we'll just shut it down, or we'll put it into one frequency mode. Again, another simple use of automation that, one, can save us a ton of money, but two, also is really good for the environment. And you know, I challenge most folks out there. You know, I get this from my team, and sometimes I feel this way too, which is, you know, there's an AI opportunity in just about anything that we choose to use it for. And I really believe in this maturity of this capability and our understanding and our ability to deploy it. And if we're brave and we're bold and we try some of these newer use cases and new services that 5G was built for, then I think as operators we stand to win big. I think if we don't, you know, we'll just become the dumb pipe and some other guy will do it. And that's not where I want to be.
No, thanks for that, Neil. And interesting that the example you gave of the sleep modes for 5G. I had an interesting conversation with an operator that's saying they didn't dare implement them because they were too worried that some of the speed testing chaps would be testing speeds at 3 in the morning, and that would damage their performance. But I think that may be more an excuse than reality. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, and we've got some questions coming in. Thank you to the audience who are starting to submit those, and I would like to get around those questions. So very quickly, Kim, if you may, just a question here regarding legacy and, you know, the need to deploy projects at scale and handle legacy. How do you balance off the need to you know, between legacy and the new and automation projects at scale to handle legacy?
I think really that's a really cool question, right? Because I mean, as a CTIO in a company that is currently integrating two former companies into each other and trying to migrate the network, I mean, I always say, I mean, yeah, 5G is great. You can have all kind of nice ideas about what you want to do with 5G, but most of my issues and challenges are actually with my 4G, right? And why should I wait? It's a little bit like, oh, let's do IoT when we have 5G. Why? I have a super great 4G network already, and a lot of the stuff I could do in 5G, I can already get started on in 4G. So typically how we solve this is we want to have something that is concrete, tangible, and a relative short-term return on investment. So look at anomaly detection. Anomaly detection doesn't care whether I have a 5G network, whether I have a data center, whether I have an IT infrastructure. I can apply it from day one. I can integrate it into my architecture, my design, and I have a super quick return on that investment because it allows me to very early on detect issues that may turn into customer critical incidents, right? So the way we choose this typically is we want to have a fairly short return on investment on what we pick up, because we want to prove to our board, to our shareholders, that actually implementing, and again, you can call it AI. We usually do this to get the money from our board, right? But let's call it machine learning or anomaly detection. It actually works. It has a very short return on investment, and I improve the customer experience vastly by implementing this. And there are beautiful solutions out there. I've implemented this in Hungary, in Magyar Telekom, and I'm also doing this here in T-Mobile Netherlands. It gives us immediate return in terms of detecting issues, but also actually something like root cause analysis. Remember, if you cannot find the root cause within the next 48 hours from an incident happening, you're more than likely to just skip it and then wait. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. Okay, if it happens again, you start looking at it. And anomaly detection, in the way that we have implemented both in Hungary and also here in the Netherlands, it helps us that instead of having maybe 50 or 60% of all incidents having a root cause, we actually have brought this up to almost 80, 90%. So I think what's very important when you choose these projects is you choose something that you feel will really work and can work in legacy. We don't have to tell the board we have to wait another 2-3 years before we can actually prove that it really works. And then you go from there. And I think also there were, I think, enough said on the chat bots and what that brings to customer care. That's obvious, right? I think we all have bought into that. But also then how you close the loop. And again, I mean, I think VMware with HANA solution has already proven that when it comes to RAN and improve the 4G quality in a RAN network, such as Volta, it just is so meaningful, and you can close the loop and you take away a lot of complexity from the engineer. And instead of having a golden solution where the same parameters are just blasted out over the whole network, you actually get tailor-made optimized solutions for that particular radio environment, for example, in your HANA solution that you actually really want in order to get your customers the best quality. Again, dynamically depending on the use cases, load cases that you have, right? So handling legacy for me is actually, if not more important than what I can do with this in my 5G environment, because I want to be able to go back and prove to my board and to my shareholders that what I do is not something that's hypothetically giving me back money in 3-4 years, but it's something that actually immediately has a return. And for sure, closing the loop on many places in our network, and for sure, implementing anomaly detection such as we have done here in Netherlands and in Hungary makes a hell of a lot of sense. Excuse my French.
Well, thank you, Kim. And I would like to get quickly through some of the questions of the audience. So before I do that, and Steve, I must press you to be fast on this response, but I recently spoke to a CTO who he wasn't being snooty about automation. He just, sometimes automating manual processes are a bit of a sticky plaster solution. It's a bit of a sticky plaster. And he said that the preference is to implement programmatically from the ground up. And a sticky plaster is a bit of a compromise that he acknowledges is necessary, but is less than desirable. Is that fair?
It is fair. Because I mean, there may be some short-term gains that can be made for more mundane sort of tasks and such that are very predictable. But based on the nature of models shifting and changing, data sources dropping in and out, you have something called a bias in modeling, where you potentially, build a model for a specific scenario, but the scenario changes based on variables. So his point's germane, and it is true. If you try to stitch together something and then the conditions around it change, you may find yourself refactoring that approach later on. So it's not always the most scalable. For small jobs, yes, but for large complex scenarios, probably not.
Okay, thank you. So we've only got 10 minutes, I'm afraid, but we've got some good questions coming, and I'm going to do my best to fire them off to you very quickly. So with Neil, there's a question here from Jan, and Jan's asking, if you could reset or redo your entire automation journey, what would you do differently? You've only got 20 seconds to answer that.
Yeah, I think go bigger and more bolder, frankly. I honestly can. I don't think you can needle this. You've got to think bold and big. And actually, I think for us, we were lucky. We had the Olympics, which really made us think differently. We run in the network of the Olympics, really made us think very differently about the network. And I think for that, we got a head start. I think if we hadn't ran the Olympics, we probably would have started that journey a lot later, actually.
Okay, that's interesting.
Just give us a different, a 10-second event just gives you a different way of thinking about things.
Okay, Kim, I've got a quick one for you. And maybe I'll pass over to Neil as well. This one is a question about organizing. So this is, how do you use AI? Centralized business units training and operating it and then handing over to problems to teams, or distributed with each team with its own use of AI for its purpose? This is from a Tim Brigg who's asked this question. So it's a little bit more about how do you organize that? Is it centralized, is it distributed? What's your experience in terms of using AI?
Well, I do think that I have a couple of presentations out there in the recent past where I've described how what is the best, in my opinion, AI machine learning implementation in our telco stack. And I do not subscribe to a very strong centralized control. I do subscribe to a kind of microservice-like architecture where you try to create as much independence as possible between the different layers in the stack. And I think also that the way we work today, if you talk about the people that has to work with this, assuming there are people behind this, I think that working in a distributed manner is something that we are getting, particularly in Corona times, more and more used to and feel more and more comfortable with. But I think it's important also being bold and brave. Yeah, that's all good. But I think there are a lot of very interesting software architectural, let's say, challenges that we need to think very carefully about before we start plastering AI over the whole picture or whatever kind of concept we have in mind.
Okay, that's fair. And Kim, I've just got another question come in from Amir for you, and specifically relating to anomaly detection. Mm-hmm. And the question that Amir is asking is, did you develop your own solution, or did you find a ready-to-use one, or what kind of key considerations went into that decision?
So I work for Deutsche Telekom, and DT has already had a very strong connection to the innovative climate, particularly in Israel. And in this case, we used in one of these settings where we go and visit Israel and visit a lot of really innovative companies. We met a company called Anodot, and actually that's the company we used in Hungary. Great, successful, actually extending this from IT infrastructure more into the network side of things. And actually from a network perspective, they are the ones we also use here in the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, I've got one for you here from Karim. And the question is, when do you think that operators, telcos, can get to a fully autonomous network? And from this questioner's experience, they are very early stages and many years off. So when do you think that we'll see that?
They're many years off. I don't think anyone is going to get the lights out as far as running a network. There's always going to be hands and decision making, lots of human intervention, and also to Kim's earlier points, like passing between layers, both in technology but also operationally. One team can't do it all. One solution can't do it all. I think there's going to be a need for people and processes to be involved for a long time before we can say hands off, lights out. I think the closest you can get, by the way, to a kind of a fixed solution that can run in that matter might be something like a private network, where you can build a very deterministic solution that has some of those inherent capabilities that we've been talking about that can do self-healing. And they're small scale. So think Wi-Fi simplicity, but strength and industrial strength and capability of cellular. I think that might be a first step to an autonomous network that's going to be more lights out, but not totally.
Okay, thank you for that, Stephen. I'm conscious of time, got a few more minutes left. And Neil, another question for you. This is from Gabriel. Gabriel's referencing your comment on, I had it all in my head 10 years ago. I'm not quite sure why he's referencing that, but he's saying, what differences do you see in some of the younger engineers and ops people compared to when you were first sort of having it in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, when I started building networks, it was a lot longer than that ago. I kind of tried to kid myself on, but I mean, when I first started building code on the internet in 1989, and if we broke it, no one noticed. Now, if you break the internet, you're on the front page of every news site on the planet. So it's harder for them. They've got to think differently about how we test things, and that and this is where I think CI/CD and continuous integration and testing is really crucial for young inventors who want to invent network technologies. But let's be realistic. We don't have enough of those people coming into this space at all. And we absolutely need to do, as an industry, do more to make working in telco more exciting and more interesting, or at least to appear that way. I've been in telco 30 years. It's been phenomenal. It's never been 2 days the same. I've built cables under the ocean. I've put satellites that beam traffic back from Mars. Every kind of wacky thing that you could want to do in technology is available to you in our industry, and we do a really terrible job of exposing that to people as they develop in their career. We've got a lot more in coding, a lot more in AI, as we've just talked about, and you can have a really strong technology career in telco. And we as an industry need to do much better at that. Otherwise, I think we will struggle for skills. Frankly, we you know, and we will find it harder to do the things that we want to do. And my biggest issue is skills, frankly, and trying to attract the right talent with the right mindset that can actually push on and, you know, build those automated and AI systems that we perhaps more experienced folks are maybe a bit scared of and don't want to risk it. But you know, we just took in a grad in placement this year. A couple of hundred people, all of them phenomenal, fantastic, wide range of backgrounds, and all of them are really excited, and it's great to be kind of surrounded by that, actually, and something I spend not enough time is working with those new folks into our industry. Okay. And it's something I'm going to do a lot more of.
Okay, I'm conscious we're down to the last minute, so I have one more quick question which you're going to have to each respond to very quickly. It follows up on your point about the example of AI for putting the networks to sleep, Neil, and more efficiency. On energy, and this isn't close to my heart because I do a lot of work on energy and emissions. On energy, does the panel have a view on the efficiency of vRAN and Open RAN solutions? Do they see this as a key issue regarding RAN architecture, or is it a bit of an afterthought?
Oh, that's a good question. Listen, I think there's so many things in ORAN to figure out. That's on the list, and they'll get to it. I think it would be, you know, it's one of the things I do remind ORAN that, you know, we've got some, you know, if I look at Huawei, which we've all had to kind of chuck out, unfortunately, they were really strong in this area in terms of power efficiency. It's an area that we can't ignore. We won't be allowed to ignore it. In fact, we can't afford to ignore it. So, you know, I think that the ORAN, Open RAN guys are working flat out to improve that. Okay. But one size doesn't fit all.
Okay. Quickly, Kim, would you add anything to what Neil said regarding this energy question?
I should be politically correct. No, I mean, I think the ORAN is fine, but let's not be naive. It's not coming around anytime soon. Yeah. The power efficiency is concerning, to say the least, irrespective of which country the vendor comes from. But I think when it comes to Open RAN, it's an interesting architecture, but it's going to cost many operators quite a lot before you can get there. There's a lot of enablers that need to be in place for this actually to work out economically. And let's also get a bit of competition here, because quite frankly, at the moment, there's not a lot of kids on the block. And before there are kids on the block, I think this is a super cool architectural view. Okay. Blah, 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 blah.
Okay, could I turn to, I guess, within RAN space, Stephen, just for you to close off, I guess VMware, new kid on the block in the RAN space, what do you see in terms of Open RAN and performance? What can you bring to that energy equation?
Well, I definitely know where the question's coming from. It comes from traditional RAN vendors and network equipment providers who have you know, market share to protect. Obviously, they're threatened by virtual RAN players and moreover by Open RAN Alliance. From a VMware perspective, we've been virtualizing and optimizing workloads on x86 hardware and in the cloud for almost 2 decades now. So it's, you know, for us, it's really part of the journey. The RAN definitely can benefit from the agility that we see in the traditional data center and the core of the network. And we believe that if you want to be able to accommodate, you know, more coverage and better capacity on demand as the network scales, you need to do it virtual. And I think those discrepancies on power consumption, I think it's buyer beware. You know, do your research and do your testing and validation. At the end, it comes down to use cases. But as Kim said, it'll evolve over time, yeah, and I think we'll see those improvements.
So I don't think the power is really the biggest challenge we have there yet.
So. Okay, there was the. Thank you all three. Thank you very much for the questions from our audience and for the poll. And I think this is going to be recorded, so please invite your colleagues to join who are unable to make it. And thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.